I'm gonna eat an Oreo for good luck. Chicken Little is a better game than most other titles. The other day, me and Bubs were on a Discord call, and we noticed that Chicken Little is somehow still available on Steam. And I don't mean like some remake, I mean the classic 06 version. This isn't a cheap remake or some knockoff or even a port. This is the actual native version. And guess what? It runs flawless. Before we get too into the weeds, let's actually break down what the game is. Chicken Little the game is a game in which... You know what? Why am I doing this? I want to pull an Illuminati and read the wiki. Chicken Little 2005 is a live-action adventure game developed by Avalanche Studio for the GameCube, Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 2, and Xbox by Artificial Mind and Movement for the Game Boy Advance. Both were published by Benuva Vista, I murdered that, games, based on the 2005 film Chicken Little. They were released October 2005. The game follows the same plot as the film Chicken Little with some tweaks and adjustments. The game also features the original actors representing their roles in the game, except for John Cusack, Abby, and Don Knutts, Major Turkey Lurkey, who were replaced by Palma Eldon and Jeff Bennett, respectively. Gameplay. The player takes control of Chicken Little. Occasionally the player is able to play as Abby, Runt, and Fish Out of Water in 6 different levels, and Major Turkey in 1 level. The player has to collect 5 baseball cards throughout each level of the game, which is actually incorrect. They're optional cards to unlock. The cards unlock a special bonus mini-games in multiplayer mode, from Wikipedia.org. And that's it. That's the whole Wikipedia. Holy shit. Nobody cared about this game. According to the above, it was released on most major platforms in 2005 and received 6 to 7 out of 10 on most platforms. The game being rated highest on PC and the lowest on the PS2, the same console I attempted to beat it on as a child. My first experience with this game was back when I was like 12 or so. My parents were nice enough to be able to afford me a PS2 Slim, the classic black one, with a see-through green controller, which I had a few games for. It was so long ago, I'm not certain where I got it. I believe it was either from the Walmart discount bin, where we got it for like $5, or a pawn shop. After opening up the package, I remember eagerly putting it in my PS2 and eagerly staring at it jaw agape on the old black CRT, the amazing title screen of Chicken Little appearing. And I thought it was the coolest thing, because I was a young idiot. Which is honestly really funny, because as a kid, my parents drove me around a lot, and I had Chicken Little, one of those little car rest DVD players, but the drives are roughly an hour in an hour and a half film. So I remember only ever making it about as far as the scene where Big Cluck would burst out of the town hall, only for my parents who was driving me to turn off the car and leave me devastated, even though I already knew how it ended. Next, let's discuss the actual game. If you want to play it, now's your time to check out, but considering you had 19 years to play this, I'm gonna go ahead. Late for school. The game starts with this cute entry section of the game being played way too loud in comparison to everything else, followed by where you need to get to school, which is on the other side of this level. It has a nice intro section teaching the basic methods with annoying pop-ups for a tutorial, but thankfully the game has relatively few of these, and the vast majority of these are in the first level. After you make your way throughout the grassy hills, you arrive at the school where you need to run around outside, collect 20 cents worth of pennies to eventually buy a soda to launch yourself into the school, ending the level. Dodgeball Hall. After launching in through and landing in the mop bucket, the player navigates through the Subway Surfer section until they crash through the doors into the gym, where they now play a minigame of playing dodgeball. And honestly, the dodgeball section is great. It's not very complicated and definitely lacks some polish and iterations that would make it better for long-term play. However, because you'll only be doing this for a maximum of like 5 minutes unless you play the multiplayer mode, you're fine. And when I say 5 times, I mean 5 rounds, not 5 games. Goosey Chase. After the dodgeball game, you are then chased back through the hall that you just came through on a loosey-goosey chasing you and occasionally throwing dodgeballs at you. And holy shit, they are insane. They will snipe you far too constantly, and I only found a very, very specific movement which would somewhat consistently allow me to dodge the balls, which is basically a Atari code. After making it to the end, there's an awkward transition to which cuts to Big Cluck giving Chicken Little a pep talk about baseball from the movie, and then it eventually tries to transition into that. Uniform hunt. The mission starts with you in a dingy back alley after Foxy Fox held the chicken at gunpoint and made him strip his clothes and dance for her. This is a relatively straightforward mission where you unlock the ability to grapple. After making it from the alley to the town square, it then opens up and lets you get the rest of the uniform in whatever order you prefer. And once you manage to find your uniform, you simply head to the field to exit the level and it ends. This level is relatively cute, simple platform that's multi-ended, allows for the player to sort of take their own path, and is a nice, neat section. It's probably one of my favorite levels in the game, a close second behind 1 or 2 others. Battling practice. The next level is basically part 1 and 2. This level serves purely as practice for the main game, getting various scores based on how well you do, such as a single, double, triple, or if you nail it, a home run. This level is semi-unique and is basically the only level with a player-defined end, letting the player practice as much as they want before they can carry on to the big game. The big game. After doing the practice, you'll move on to the big game where you make it through a half-baked game of baseball, unless you're a baller like me and you get a home run on the first hit, ending the game effectively instantly. Carpool craze. After that, following the steps of the movie, the sky falls and the others are called. And this being one of the biggest sides from the movie, because this is when Runt holds another old lady at gunpoint, and the whole thing turns into Fast and the Furious. It has you running some side quests before eventually arriving at Big Cluck's house. Backyard Pursuit. After the fish is abducted, you unlock the power attack, which basically is a new attack which will be permanently using after this because it just saves a lot of time and has a larger AoE. This is a great little platforming level that has you chasing after the fish, eventually arriving at the ship. This one is just like the uniform hunt level mechanically, having you chase the fish, but with the added sliding pipe sections and the new power attack. One thing that genuinely blew me away about this level is how well detailed it is, considering this is a PS2 game. Way before something like Substance Designers and whatever else they would have existed, the textures for this game look great in this level, and I personally think that this level is probably the highlight of the entire game. Space Simulator. This is the part where the game both takes a step away from the movie and, in my opinion, a dip in fun. No offense if you enjoy these sections, but you have bad taste. JK, JK, no JK, JK, seek help, JK. This is a pseudo Star Fox clone, which is honestly a little fun. You can collect different weapons, last for a bit, and after you have an alt fire, which you can use to launch missiles and some other generic stuff like gathering health. I don't want to get caught up on this too much for right now, so we'll talk more about this later. Alien Abbey. This level is awesome because you get a genuinely nice mix-up. What makes it great is that you can now play as Abby. This change is largely cosmetic, but it's great to see. The game letting you actually play as another character without it just being a cheap level. This level takes place with you as the player navigating through the ship after infiltrating it. This level is the second time the game branches away from the main story, making it so that all of the characters got separated instead of just looking for the fish. But it's relatively nice and being a fun 3D platforming section with some fun little timing gimmicks in it. Runaway Rust. This is a section where you play as Runt, who is somehow teleported and fallen into this space cauldron, and you have to do more Subway Surfers to reach the end of the level. Simple and easy. Space Alarm. Now this has you navigating through the space once again as Chicken Little. It's a nice little mix-up, some tedium as is similar to the Alien Abbey, but I won't get too upset at this level because you do play as a different character with some mix-ups. Space Simulator 2. This is one of those top-down scroller shooters, ride-in style arcade games. It's rather simple at first, a basic sort of bullet hell. It's a nice gameplay mix-up and I don't mind it at all. Tube Surf. This is where you then cut to whatever Fish was up to, which is basically playing Vortex for the iPod Classic 3rd Gen. Cornfield Escape. After escaping the ship, Abby, Runt, and Fish are standing in the baseball field where they entered the ship, and they're just fucking standing there like a bunch of idiots. After grabbing them all, they just fuck off again, and they need to go find them in the cornfield again because sure, why not? Canon Chaos. After getting them all again and escaping, what ends up happening is fucking Mayor Turkey Lurkey comes out of this truck with a Spirit Tracks-esque tank and starts fucking taking on the aliens one-on-one, fucking Rambo style. Fire Truck Frenzy. Suddenly, Runt decides to hotwire Fire Truck. But you have to run through each one of these little rings, and if you don't, then I'm sure something bad happens at the end. Tube Tremble. After you get to the mothership, I can finally see past the part where I was constantly being cucked by, and ends up being a run section, which is actually a weird difficulty spike, but it might just be a hard mode difficulty spike, some weird calibration stuff. This is basically just the mop bucket section again, but with some tweaks and some theming changes and some very weird timing. Alien Little. After Runt being saved, we're now in the ship where... Hold on a second. This is the same level as before. The same one, which was already done by Chicken Little and Abby with some small changes. This isn't anything atrocious. It just puts sort of a damper on the whole thing, but what have you. This isn't a big deal. I'm sure the budget was tight and gravity grab. Oh, god damn it! See, I was super into the idea of more coming, but this is just the previous Chicken Little level again. Whatever, it's basically the end of the game. I'm sure it's wrapping up soon, probably the last level, and let's just... Space Simulator 3. Another Star Fox level? Whatever, I guess it's fine. This is a new level from the ground up, but a bit repetitive and whatever. At least it's going to be the end. Final boss. Oh god, another fuck! Oh, hold on. A new level? A boss battle? Unique to the game? Damn, this is actually kind of nice. So, this boss basically requires you to kind of bait some attacks, hit a trigger, a weak point appears, you attack that trigger, you then move to a new platforming area. This happens 3 times, it's done. You know what? The last few levels were kind of bad, but, you know, at least there's a nice mix-up now. It's a nice solid end to the game, something unique, and a nice little touch where they added something new. Runt's Escape. I originally wrote a much more scathing review for this section, but in reality, I just completely mixed it up for one of the other many repeats in this game. So knowing that this is basically just the ending to more or less every Halo repeated, honestly, not bad. There's definitely worse, but... Space Armada. Now we're doing another space level. Again! That is the 4th one of 24 levels. That means that 1/6 of these games is space levels. This game is a wannabe Star Fox. Okay, remember before when I said I'd be talking more about my issue with these levels? This is where that's going to come out. Avalanche Studios for this game has basically attempted to clone Star Fox, and honestly, I don't hate that idea. The issue that I have with this is that they try to copy Star Fox while missing a lot of the appeal of Star Fox. When you played Star Fox, the main appeal was, at least for me, was there's a lot of cinematic stuff going on in the background, a lot of voice lines, dialogue, there was secret paths you could look for, little mini challenges, things like that that were relatively interesting. The issue with this game of Chicken Little is that there's basically nothing interesting or minute. You're basically strapped in a chair and you're given a little laser gun and told to zap targets from A to B until the level's over. This massively changes the game from being something that the player engages with to an on-rails shooter where you're just waiting for it to end. And in this last level, where you're playing as Ace instead of Chicken Little in this little power ship and whatever, I don't feel empowered in any way. It doesn't feel interesting. It doesn't feel like a victory lap, which I feel like it should be. In this level, I should be borderline overpowered, where I'm basically just blasting through everything and it's a breeze. The issue is that other than this big last wave they send at you at the end, nothing really feels like a finale. And even then, there's a big finish line, which is more just a metaphorical symbol for, hey, look, the game's done, than anything new. I understand why it exists. It's a new ship, it's a new level. They actually force you to tilt in a couple sections. That's neat. But from this point forward, this just feels like kind of a bad end to the game. Pros and cons. So, now that the game is over, let's discuss some pros and cons. One thing that was genuinely shocking about this game is that the game was genuinely fun. It was stable, relatively bugless, very consistent, and compared to a lot of other games on the market currently, Cyberpunk, it is shockingly solid, and it has a nice range of mechanics that do get repetitive towards the end, but they at least didn't overwhelm most of them. Weaknesses. The graphics are dated. Now, I don't want to sound like a dingle, but the graphics are rather dated. This isn't a I don't like the style way, but more of a this is a published in 2005 way, and I can see it. That being said, I don't want to make it seem like I'm hating on them, given my limited knowledge of graphics programming and how the PS2 had a clock speed of roughly 300 megahertz and about 32 megahertz of RAM. This is extremely understandable. Can you even download a phone app that is less than 30 megabytes now? At least one that isn't one of those like light versions, which is basically just a glorified web browser. Cuts between the story and the gameplay are rather jarring. I find the cuts between the movie and the game are rather jarring. I'm not trying to be rude when I say this, but when I play the game, I get immersed in the less ideal graphics. The issue, though, is that when I have these cuts between the movie, which is a very fine-crafted animation for the most part, it is very jarring to cut back to either gameplay graphics or to an in-game cinematic thing, which just doesn't even hold the same contrast. I understand that this was on the PS2, so I don't want to criticize people for not having a render farm to render this on, but I do wish they would have almost just stuck entirely with in-game rendered animations, but I also know that would have increased the budget quite a bit. So this is kind of one of those rocks in a hard place issues. This is a thing that is rather harsh to say, but the game really felt like it was limping towards the end, as the final platforming levels were effectively a repeat of a few stages earlier, which really made the last level feel much more like a victory lap than a proper level before the boss fight even happened. And the last couple levels after that kind of just dragged out and didn't feel like anything interesting. The game changes the story of Chicken Little. Another issue I have with the game is it follows a good chunk of the story and how it goes, and I'm generally not opposed to things being changed. In this case, it felt like it was simply to hold the game together and add more levels, and I completely understand why they did this. However, personally, I don't think the story benefits from the changes, nor the gameplay, nor the levels, and I think that shows with how repetitive some of the moments are. It added a lot of tedium to the game and contributed to some of my least favorite levels, so personally speaking, I think that it would have been better if these were cut. Although I was relatively harsh in this game, I want to make it clear I don't actually hate this game, and I actually massively prefer it. One thing that kind of frustrates me currently about the gaming market is that there's this really bad issue of that every game is either trying to be takes up your time, 100% engagement feedback loop that is just so hard to break and so hard to get into. If you take games like Siege, Apex Legends, Call of Duty, they're all trying to keep your time constantly and be the main game that you play, if not the only game. And I'm borderline convinced that the reason why these games are so large is so that big studios like Call of Duty can effectively stay on your system and elbow out any other big game. Because then to change games at that point is a large commitment, and hey, you already spent the money on the game, might as well keep playing it, you somewhat enjoy it, eat your veggies. Or the inverse of that is that there's been this sort of trend of games that are indie, that are kind of really small and are only really meant to be played for a few hours. One game that I would love to make a video about in the future is called Monstrum. It's an indie game made by Junkfish Studios that is, long story short, a really fun game, but being real, still, if you're a relatively competent gamer who is aware of basic sort of horror hiding mechanics and you can adapt relatively quickly, you can beat the game in like 3 hours. It is genuinely not a long game. So you have this weird dilemma where games are either way too long or way too short, and there doesn't really feel like a game that you can pick up for a weekend anymore. This is one of those games which Bubs bought for me, and we beat it over like 3 days. It was a nice little experience. It was a bit of a drag towards the end, but it was over and it was done, and I look back at the game more fondly because of that. By comparison, with how a lot of games are now, it feels like they're either way too short and they're basically just an alpha more or less to be turned into something larger, or it just feels like these are something that are kind of just thrown out there to just kind of go for it. Or as I mentioned before, these massive things which are supposed to consume 100% of your time. And honestly, it's really sad to see this market go away, because I think these games were something great that you can find and just kind of just chip through and kind of just have fun with. This is what these $5 games used to be. The bargain bin games, which were the diamonds in the rough. The only issue is that a lot of the studios who made these games either couldn't make it or became dependent on the franchises that they were based off of. Avalanche Studios effectively has only made Disney games with a few exceptions. And sure, they're alive and kicking and still going hard, making games like Hogwarts Legacy, which I've personally never played. They're still alive, but they're completely tied to IPs, and it makes me genuinely curious what this studio could do if they had the time, freedom, and or budget to go pursue something that like they wanted to. But instead, we're kind of just stuck in this weird, awkward middle limbo where they're kind of almost making just IP flips. Not saying that any of their games are particularly bad. I've only played Chicken Little as far as I'm aware. But it goes to show you there was people who worked on this game who were genuinely good at making games and understood the game making process, but there were some bad judgments which felt like they're trying to stretch out time and development, and it just kind of bit them long term, I think. That being said, I completely understand that the source material of Chicken Little is not exactly a high bar to work off of, but I think the developers did actually do a really good job. Anyways, that's it. Like and subscribe. More videos coming sometime. Smile. Goodbye. Have a good day. Blech. Hey there, just wanted to say thanks for watching, and God bless if you somehow made it this far. This is one of my first big projects like this, so if you enjoy it, then, do the YouTuber likey, subscribey stuff so I know you enjoy it, and have a good one.